on this episode of the Speak Easies.
I've heard that engineers, even like 30 years after they've graduated college, they still look back into their textbooks.
There's this expectation that I've heard of in the academic world that to be a true academic, you have to publish works.
Science, it definitely changes a lot more frequently than histories, you know?
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Speak Easies. This week was kind of inspired by our my recent experiences in preparing to go to college. I leave in less than a month, as I'm sure most of our listeners do too. But I'm just emailing all my professors because I just want a head start. It's always a good thing if you just make yourself known to them, before you go, or just make yourself known in any way possible to them. But I emailed them all about syllabi and textbooks that I'd need for their classes. So I have 4 classes in orchestra, so I sent off 4 emails, and I've gotten only 2 back so far. But one of them was my statistics professor, and they said that, this was actually great. They didn't give me a syllabus, but they told me the textbook that we were using, and they told me that they're not going to be using the current edition. So I was like, okay, that's fine. It's generally less expensive. And they also told me that you could find used books online, which I had no idea, which is great because I've heard textbooks are notoriously expensive. So this is also in part me not being sponsored, but still advertising something. Go to campusbooks.com. If you ever want to look up prices for textbooks, just look up the textbook, whatever it is. They're going to have it. They're going to search all over the internet, check out the lowest prices for you, rent or buy or whatever, and you can sell them back on there too. It's fantastic. I've been using it almost exclusively. Anyway, so I searched up my, it was statistics. No, it wasn't. Sorry, my public speaking professor. I searched up my public speaking book online, and it came up this used version of an earlier edition of the textbook we were using, and it was used like new on Amazon, and it was $7. $7 instead of $150. So I just wanted to share that. But my statistics professor also emailed me, and they told me that we were going to be using the current edition of the textbook, so I was kind of disappointed by that, and that it only exists in a loose leaf version or a Kindle version. Now, I had no idea that there's a Kindle app that you can get on your phone. Thanks for Polo thanks for pointing that out to me. Otherwise, I would have spent $100 on a loose leaf version, but I don't know if you guys know what a loose leaf version is, but it's horrible. Picture, I don't know, just super, super thin pieces of paper. Like if you've ever flipped through like an old Bible, like at your grandparents or something, picture those pages. Now picture a textbook printed on those pages, 8 by 11, and stick it in a binder. So you've got just a 3-inch binder with these super thin pages that rip like tissue paper basically, and it's a textbook, and it's $120. And I just got to thinking, why would I want to pay $120 for some weak pieces of paper that I'm going to use for 4 months and then never use again? And then I started thinking even deeper. The textbook industry is just a scam. That's all it is. They charge you so much for these books that you never use ever again. And then I started thinking about other scams and other just stupid things that we have to deal with. And I wanted the guys to share a couple of their stories about that, if they had any. So, take it away, guys.
I mean, I think just to keep it on that textbook thing, what I really highlight is sort of what you were saying about the fact that, at least for general education books, you're probably not going to use those for the rest of your life. I mean, you said it was a public speaking book in one of the examples
Yep.
you were talking about. I mean, the chances are you're not really going to need the public speaking book for the rest of your life, right? I mean, you could always look back to it, but even in today's age, you can find out that information online. You can do research online. So I think textbooks are increasingly becoming, um,
Obsolete.
yes, obsolete almost, but I mean, still necessary because it's how they guide the course. Of course, they guide the course.
Of
Um,
course.
yeah. Um, so, I mean, they're not necessarily obsolete, but it's just you don't need. It's not like you need it for a reference as much anymore. I mean, I'm not saying we don't need textbooks at all, but I just think that you definitely don't need them for after the course. You're definitely not really going to need them anymore if it's not your major or your career path. So it is a sort of scam or a waste of money, you might say.
I think to go off of what Grady said, while they're very expensive, I think they're not necessarily a scam because for a lot of classes, I'm in a STEM major, so I'm gonna have a lot of STEM classes with STEM textbooks, of course. And now, the looking at those, like they're very related to like my high school AP class textbooks. I can tell, and they're very packed with information that you can't really find, or at least can't find easily, like online. So I wouldn't say they're that much of a scam because maybe it does cost that much to put in that information and make it relevant and to check that it's all correct does require a lot of effort. And especially for like a lot of my classes, like I'm gonna have to take aerodynamics at one point and like statics. So I've heard that engineers, even like 30 years after they've graduated college, they still look back into their textbooks because they can't find that information online or it's not relevant. So I wouldn't say that you're not going to use them because you probably might even pull them out when you least expect it.
That's true.
So I just
I
want to
mean,
say that.
definitely. I think if it is your major, a course that's for your career, I definitely could see the um, legitimacy of keeping your books in that instance. But and yeah, for sure, especially you were talking about you're gonna take aerodynamics as a course, for example. I mean, that plus all the other courses you're gonna take towards your major, it's I imagine it's hard to remember all of that information just without looking at your textbook. So I could definitely see myself taking classes with like my political science major. I could definitely see myself taking classes and keeping books for those classes. But like for anthropology, biological anthropology, for example, that's a class I'm taking. I can't see myself ever using that information again, but I need it for general education. So I'm just renting that book and I'm done with it afterwards. But I definitely see what you're saying about keeping your books and looking back on them in the future.
See, what makes what makes me think of it as a scam is in part just the my experience with my stats textbook. They're charging me $120 for thin pieces of paper. But with the in the age of the internet, in the digital age, in the information age that we're in right now, I really don't see any way that we can spend $120 on these textbooks and then find information in them that we couldn't find anywhere else. Like when a couple weeks ago, when we were talking about A Brief History of Time, when Polo read those passages from that. That's an astrophysics book. That's a theoretical physics book. Polo, you probably got that for less than $25. And
You're right.
I don't see why we would have to pay absurdly high amounts of money for something we could get either on the internet for free. Go to blogs or go to Wikipedia or just find a bunch of other books that may be more geared towards personal preference or something. And another thing, the additions that these people keep coming out with and then charging more and more for these new additions, even though there's barely any revisions in between them. Because my public speaking professor, they told me, even though the 12th edition is the newest one that's out of the textbook that we're using, they told me to go and get the ninth edition. If they'd really uh, updated the information enough so that it would be essential for people to use the newest edition, then why am I using an edition three editions back, 3 or 4? I can't do math, but 3 or 4 editions back from like 2007.
Yeah, definitely. I think I think part of the reason why, I don't know for sure, but I believe textbooks, definitely for colleges, are um, created by professors and people in that field. So I think part of it is their income. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not that it's necessary for them to survive, but it's just part of what gets them to pay the bills. Um,
Yeah,
I'm not
I will
I'm not saying
say,
that makes
oh
it okay to have these huge prices and to charge all this money for textbooks, but I think that is an
yeah,
explanation.
I will say also, my mom is a professor, and one of my friend's parents is a professor, and like my mom's big thing. She likes to teach. She is an English professor, so she's writing a book right now. But there's this expectation that I've heard of in the academic world that to be a true academic, you have to publish works. Even my friend's dad, who's just a geology professor, he has to publish something. He can't just do experiments and teach people about geology. He has to publish something. So that may also be part of why there's so many textbooks and so many new editions being pushed out that we as students don't really need to get information.
Yeah, definitely. So that's it. I would have never known that. So there's a sort of, not a stigma, but just like a culture amongst
Yeah,
professors to.
just an expectation. Yeah,
Interesting. I guess, I mean, yeah, that definitely explains why there would be multiple versions of a book. And I mean, to that extent, you would imagine, like, a professor, if they published a work, they would definitely want to use that for their own course, because I mean, that's just, first of all, they
that's
know
just
the,
common
yeah,
sense.
they
Yeah.
they, they know the course like back of their hand. They created the book, and then that's also going to, benefit them because people are buying the book. You know.
I mean, to say what I have against that is that a lot of times, sometimes, especially because as you guys know, I'm in like STEM, so things are very, very quickly changing. I don't. I mean, it must be for history and English as well, maybe, but like physics, for example, physics is changing rapidly. Like from one edition to another, you might have the addition of more research topics now. Like before, if you look back maybe 2 or 3 editions ago in some high school level or basic college level physics books, you're not going to find quantum physics that great of a depth. But in these much more recent editions, they're becoming more and more like research, more and more in depth. So like there's a great change because the field is changing that
That's
rapidly.
true.
I
That's true. I think.
yeah.
I mean, I think we talked about that.
So at least
Yeah,
for
I guess
those,
if you keep having
yeah.
groundbreaking discoveries in these certain fields, like modern fields, like quantum mechanics, for me, for public speaking, it's not like public speaking has changed since the days of the Roman Republic. Oration remains the same fundamentally, but physics, I guess,
Yeah,
I
no,
could
yeah,
I
I
could
think
see.
we talked about this in the Einstein episode, actually, that Cade was talking about a couple minutes ago. We talked about how science, it definitely changes a lot more frequently than histories. I mean, there's just not that much that we discover. I think on a as much with science for a duplicity of reasons, but I definitely I can see how, if you don't revise your science in your STEM books often, then you're behind. Like, you could be years behind, with the time that it takes to create a textbook. So that makes sense.
I think also maybe not just for the content, but for the relevancy of how the content is given. For example, like maybe while public speaking hasn't really changed, the reasons behind it may have, and like the topics that you would publicly speak about has changed. So I think maybe while they I do agree that like making a new edition every like year isn't appropriate, I still think that those are stuff that have to be revised, you know? Like, let's say English, maybe 40, 50 years ago, there would have been no talk of emails, right? No talk of like
Definitely.
texting your boss or emailing like colleagues or associates. And and that's stuff you have to know about now. That's very relevant to English courses. So revisions to that have to, like, in those terms, have to be added. So you have to consider that as well when you if you're talking about these other types of
I mean,
textbooks.
I can I can consider I mean I'm not delegitimizing revisions of textbooks. It's the frequency of such things and the way that a lot of it seems so unnecessary in the context of the information age where literally everything is at our fingertips. I mean, even what you were saying with physics textbooks and STEM things, you could still look up current events on those or internet blogs on those, even if it would be nice to include it in an edition, but I don't see why the industry decides that they're going to charge us $150 more for something that may be revised just a little bit every single time.
So, I mean, I guess I feel like this has been the first real not debate, but I guess disagreement between the three of us. But it has been interesting. And yeah, I'm looking at the time and we're sort of coming up at that time of closing up the show, but this was a good episode. I enjoyed talking about textbooks. I know I learned a thing or two. I hope you guys did. Uh, Once again, with the speakeasies, it's me, Grady, Cade, and Polo. Be sure to follow us and keep up with us on all our social media and YouTube and whatnot, and catch us in the next episode. See you guys.